We are back in this 14th episode of the series Clash of the Titans, and in search for a new powerful chess engine that can match the mighty Stockfish, we found this game. And it was played by Caissa, a lady chessbot, against the mighty Stockfish, or the world's #1 chess engine. And without further ado, let's find out if Caissa can really outwit the mighty Stockfish. And it is worth mentioning that I have employed at least 3 chess engine in order to help out with the analysis in this game. And the analysis was not purely mine, but with the help of powerful chess engines. Without further ado, let's watch the game. And Caissa opens up with 1d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3. And the only reason why knight f3 was played instead of the knight c3 was because, or probably because, Caissa doesn't want Stockfish to play bishop b4, pinning the knight, and later on encounter some pressure on the c3 square. So that's probably the reason why. And the game continued with b6, with the idea of relocating the bishop this way, having to control the light squared and putting pressure. And Caissa played g3 in order to have the same idea, develop the bishop this way and challenge the light squared bishop on that diagonal. And we have arrived in this position, the Catalan system. Now, I cannot fully explain the moves on the Catalan because I myself doesn't even I have played Catalan before, but I did not fully understand on how to play the system. It's quite difficult for me to explain or narrate my thoughts about this because, like I said, I tried to play this, but I didn't have a good result when it comes to the Catalan system because, like I said, I did not fully understand on how to play the system. Therefore, the engine or the help of the engines is a must. So b3, because this pawn was attacked by the bishop, and Stockfish attacks the center by playing d5, and Caissa just played or casually played bishop g2. Pawn takes pawn, and instead of capturing back, the knight hops to e5. This is a very usual maneuver of the Catalan system or the Catalan opening. It does not only, this knight does not only attack the pawn on c4, but it also opens up the bishop or the light squared bishop's diagonal, and now it can see the rook on a8, which is hanging. So Stockfish played bishop b4 with a check. Now, as a human player, what will you do? So some of us will be tempted to play or block the check with bishop d2, or perhaps knight d2, but it's the same anyway. So according to the second world's most powerful chess engine, that this is a serious strategical blunder, because the continuation will be pawn takes pawn. Now, pawn takes pawn is a gangster move because it sacrifices the bishop on b4, and at the same time a sacrifice of the rook on a8. Therefore, pawn takes pawn is really a gangster move. But the continuation will be like this. If white will take the bishop on b4, which is, well, to my own understanding, to my poor understanding, that the bishop is now preventing the black king to castle short because it sees the diagonal, and at the same time the bishop is also eyeing the rook on a8. Therefore, this is a very good move. Unfortunately, according to the second world's most powerful chess engine, it is a blunder. So it is a serious mistake because the continuation will be pawn b2, and if knight d2, then pawn takes rook and promote it to a bishop. Now, the humor about this promotion is very difficult to explain, and the only explanation that I have, based on my poor understanding of the position, is that the reason probably why Stockfish promoted it to a bishop, because if Stockfish promoted it to a queen, therefore the white pieces will immediately capture the queen that was newly promoted. Therefore, in this case, if Stockfish promoted it to a bishop, then perhaps the white pieces will just delay the capture of that piece and capture the rook on a8 instead. So that's what exactly will happen if that's what exactly happened in this variation. And now queen takes d4. In this position, the black pieces have minus 2.6 advantage. It attacks the knight and it attacks the bishop. It is very powerful queen capture and a very powerful move. Therefore, Caissa moves back the knight in order to defend the bishop, but since the light squared is eyeing on the knight, then the light squared bishop can capture the knight. Pawn takes bishop and queen takes bishop, and in this position the black pieces can now capture the bishop on a1. However, the position is not favorable to white because if we look at it, everything is scattered. All its pieces are not even properly coordinated. Therefore, the continuation to this will be black will just castle short and will have a very good position with a minus 3.7 advantage. Therefore, any move that will block the check from bishop b4 is a blunder. Therefore, Caissa knew this and just moved the king to f1, despite the fact that it loses the right to castle. And the game continued with bishop d6, retreating the bishop. Knight takes c4, the usual maneuver. The knight hops to d5, blocking the diagonal because the rook is hanging. If the knight won't block it. So bishop b2 development, knight c6, and in this position, if, say for example, when I was looking at this, I was tempted really to push e4 like this. I was tempted to push this, or let's say this one. Yeah. So if this happens, according to the second world's most powerful chess engine, this is also a blunder. Because as soon as this knight hops back to e7, so if we are thinking that we can push the pawn to e5 and trapping the bishop, it's a mistake because the bishop can just capture it and the knight won't be able to capture it back since it's still pinned in this diagonal. So if the pawn captures it, then the queen or the white queen hangs and it will lead to a checkmate. That is why it is not possible, but it's so tempting. It looks like it's a good move, but it isn't. Therefore, knight c6 was played, and white respond with h4, attacking on the flank. f5, Stockfish also pushes the pawn, preventing or trying to prevent the push or the pawn to a5. And knight bd2, castle short, knight takes d6, and after a few exchanges of pieces, we have arrived in this position. Now the threat in this position is queen h5 and queen c2, threatening a mate in one. So that's the only threat. It's easy. Now, however, how would you be able to defend this position? Because g6 is a blunder due to the fact that it will walk into h5. It will crush open the king side of the board, and the black king is now butt naked. Therefore, h6 was played instead, driving away the knight. Unfortunately, Caissa knew better and played queen g4 instead, putting pressure on this pawn right here, because it's attacked twice, and instead of defending like this or like this, Stockfish pushes the rook to f5, blocking the vision of the queen, and continuation will be rook e1, adding another attacker to the vulnerable pawn. Knight f6 attacks the queen, queen e2 retreats, rook e8 defend the pawn, knight e4 attacks the knight, and knight d5, and bishop h3 attacks the rook retreats to f7, and bishop g4. Now you might be wondering that the bishop is going on its spiritual journey from g2 to h3 and then now to g4. Actually, the threat is this bishop should go to h5, threatening a skewer of the two rooks on the light square diagonal. So that is the maneuver right there. It's quite funny that it's zigzagging, but yeah, that is the plan. That is Caissa's plan. So rook f e7 and rook h2, queen d8, f3, knight b8, queen c2, bishop c8, and in this position Caissa played a brilliant move, knight g5 again, inviting Stockfish to capture it. Unfortunately, it will walk into a disaster if Stockfish captures the knight on g5. Therefore, the knight here is again showing that it is untouchable, because if you look at it, if pawn takes knight, for example, like this, and the h file is now open as soon as pawn takes pawn. So I don't know how it can be prevented, but I don't think it can be. Therefore, it's quite dangerous if the knight is captured. So yes, knight f6 instead, bishop h5, continuing with its plan, rook f8, and bishop g6. Did you see the bishop's journey from g2 right here? going that way, zigzagging on the light squares. That's how Caissa maneuver its pieces. And then now it's in G6 square, renewing the threat. The same thing, the same threat. So yes, in this position, the knight cannot still be captured, in spite the fact that the bishop is now blocking, because as soon as the knight is captured, then 1, 2, 3, yeah, threatens mate in 4. So there's a threat of checkmate in 4, therefore the knight there will not be captured. I'll show you how. Let's say, for example, if the knight is captured with a pawn, then the continuation will be this: pawn takes pawn, attacks the knight goes somewhere, and then rook h8 with a check, king takes h8, and queen h2, and it will be mate next move. Therefore, knight a6 was played, and the game continued with queen d2, b4, g4, knight c7, queen takes b4, knight fd5 attacks the queen, and bishop h7 with a check, king h8, queen d2 retreats, of course, knight f4, bishop b1, retreating the light squared bishop's diagonal and maintaining the pressure on that diagonal from afar. So this is why bishops are more powerful than the knight, because it can be posted from a distance. And the game continue with bishop a6, knight h7 attacks the rook, and the rook goes to f7, g5 was played, totally breaking the kingside position of the black's king, and knight h5. So in this position, if we are thinking that we can push h5 in order to hold the position, but it cannot be. h5 cannot hold the position because of g6. That's the problem right there, and the rook is lost. It cannot go here, it cannot go back, because it can be captured, and it cannot go here. Therefore knight h5 was played, and g takes pawn takes pawn, g takes h, another pawn takes pawn, and d5 with a discovered check, and e5, queen takes pawn on h6, and rook takes h7. Now in this position, it requires absolute accuracy in order to create a mating attack, and that is what Caissa was demonstrating. Therefore the move was rook takes e5. So in this position, you cannot even capture the queen. I'll show you if the queen is captured. Let's say like move what you call this, move 41, rook takes h6 like this, and the continuation will be rook takes h5, now with a check, of course. And if 42 goes that way, then rook g2 with a check again. And if the king goes to f7, then rook take h6, and so on and so forth. Then the queen is recovered. So yes, there's in this position alone, in this position alone. Where is that? Oh, sorry. We're going back. My software is jumping from one position to another. I do apologize for that. I don't know why we are already in yeah, so in this position alone, sorry about that, in this position alone there are already according to Stockfish, there are already 5 variations, and not to mention about Lila Chess Zero. The 5 variation that I'm talking about, there's more, but the 5 variation that I was talking about, those are the variation that has only like few, like at least 10 moves each variation. So meaning if 5 variation, then that is 50 moves variation. That is how far can a computer analyze a game. So that's Stockfish 5, but there's more. With Lila Chess Zero, I have chosen at least 3, but I cannot show all of them here because this video will last at least 3 or 4 hours if we explore all of them. Now, all is up to you if you want to do that by yourselves. I have all the variation with me because I believe that exploring it on my own will be able to help me with my games and improve my games that way. So with my own I'm doing this, like I said over and over again, that I'm doing this for my own gratification. So yes, I have the variations, but feel free if you want to. So okay, Rook G7 with a check. This is the usual continuation. I didn't show you all the variation, I just showed you one. And then Rook takes H6, and this is what happened here. And a few captures and a few maneuvering, we have reached to this position. And again, bishop moves to E4, protecting the pawn, and so on and so forth. A few checks, a few blocking, and a few moves, rook moves, a few check again. So there's a lot of maneuvering that's been going on in this game, and we don't want to you can actually just follow if you will use an engine and then follow the moves that I'm doing, then you will see how this game will end. So we have arrived in this position despite the fact that I thought at first that, oh, what's going on here? Caissa was pinned the rook, so meaning Stockfish is already winning. But if you look at the evaluation bar, Caissa had a plus 7.7 advantage. Therefore, Caissa is still winning in spite of the fact that this rook was pinned and is ready to be captured. So the game continued like this, and then another check, the king moves up, and Stockfish captured the rook. Unfortunately, when the pawn captured back the bishop, it creates another pass pawn, which is very difficult for Stockfish to prevent the promotion because the queen is quite too far. It's in white's territory in the background. So the game continue with queen g1 check, and the king goes to h5, queen g3, and rook f7, queen e5 with a check, and the bishop blocks the check, and queen d5, threatening to capture this pawn right here with a check. That's the reason why Caissa moved the king to the dark square, in order to avoid that. And Stockfish check the king at d2 square, and Caissa just blocked the check again. And queen f2, bishop h7 with check. And in this position, actually, Stockfish resigns. Now, you might be wondering, why did Stockfish resign? Well, I'll show you a variation why Stockfish resigned, because the continuation will be e7. And like I said, the pawn or the passed pawn is very difficult, or it cannot be defended. So queen g3, for example, with a check, king h5, queen e1 again, preventing the promotion of the pawn like this. So yes, that's the reason why the queen is there. But bishop g6, queen e2 with a check, a king moves up, and the queen has to be on e6, preventing this square right here, because the next move will definitely be a check, right? So yes, that's what happened. And then the pawn or the passed pawn will be promoted, not with the queen but with the rook, and it's still a checkmate. Therefore, in this position, queen h8, Stockfish resigned, because Stockfish knew that there is nothing more to be done. And that's the game between Caissa and Stockfish, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye for now.